Hello, my name is Brian Bowen, and welcome to my channel. I am a Christian apologist, scholar, and I'm pretty much a Christian apologist, jack of all trades kind of Christian apologist. Um, I deal with just about everything involving this particular subject matter. One of the things that I research quite a bit about is the resurrection of Jesus. I watch some debates sometimes, and among those debates was a debate by Jonathan McClattchie and Matt Dillahunty. I will also watch all four parts of the review that Matt Dillahunty does with Timothy McGrew. Sometimes I'll respond to some of the things in the comments because, I mean, the people that respond to these comments, obviously, I don't want to sound arrogant or conceited or something of that nature. I'm not trying to be that way. It just seems like they lack scholarly and philosophical challenge. I don't think most of the people in this comment section knows how to properly evaluate debates. It doesn't seem that way. Now, there might be some people on there that do, but a lot of people don't seem to know how to. I mean, Jonathan McClattchie left for like 5 minutes. He basically got frustrated with Matt at one point, clicks off, and he comes back, apologizes to Matt, and he was only gone for like 5 minutes, but everybody assumes that or a lot of the atheists in the comments assume that he must have called the debate because he left for 5 minutes. And it's not very sound method of evaluating debates. You don't evaluate debates based on whether or not someone took off for a couple of minutes. You evaluate debates on the basis of the arguments that are being presented. All right. It just so happens that I commented to a guy by the name of Jamie Goodlett, and someone replied back. I responded to him. Basically, I just told him about the definition of proper definition of evidence and how it's supposed to actually be defined. And on a guy by the name of, I'm gonna pronounce his first name as Anuj, because I don't know how to pronounce his first name. He's from India. I come to find out later. But he's from India, Anuj Agarwal. And apparently he used to be, he said he used to be in Hinduism. Then he's began to research Islam and Christianity and didn't think that there was evidence for either one. So he now considers himself with the worldview of naturalism. That's what he argued, or what he said, as far as his background, because I asked him about it later on, because he kept trying to defend the Quran, even though he doesn't believe in the Quran. And the reason he was trying to defend the Quran is because he thought the Quran was better evidence than the New Testament and Christianity, and so he kept on going back and forth. He thought Jonathan had a double standard. He thinks that I had a double standard, and I never had a double standard. In fact, during the entire debate, I constantly told him and challenged him on it that the same standard by which I'm judging the Bible by, I'm also judging the Quran by. It just the Quran keeps telling the standard. Now, in our debates and back and forth, we went over 2 weeks long doing this. And we made some very extensive posts, made some short ones, we made some very extensive ones. We made point-by-point lists, we cited scholars, we cited sources, we cited evidence. We were going back and forth constantly for over 2 weeks, and it numbered into over 200 replies. Okay, understand, one of these is this guy right here. Okay, that's the only one he did. 220 replies between me and Anuj Agarwal. Okay. All right. So he responds back. He says, "Yeah, but Jonathan also discounts other literary sources and testimonies. Basically, his position for evidence for his own faith is far lighter than any other one." And I respond back, says, "I'm sorry, but you're misrepresenting his position and mine. But of course, I'm only giving benefit of the doubt on mine because he didn't know what my position was." His position isn't you must accept testimony that's hundreds of years removed from the original source. Anyhow, we went back and forth like this, and I'm not going to read every single post. I'm gonna read some of them. Most of it, I'm just gonna go kind of give you some general idea and background of it, and what the questions is, because that's a lot of post reading. I don't want to make that video this long. But I put, yeah, I'm sorry, but you're misrepresenting his position and mine. His position isn't, you must accept testimony that is hundreds of years removed from the original source. Whenever you look at other religious works, they don't have, no, there's some typos every now and then. Most of this, some of this I was doing at work, so I always had to be real quick and worked a lot on memory, just to let you know. And there's some typos because I'm typing real fast, that sort of thing. And I'm doing it mostly on my laptop. Although toward the end of the day, I did do some of it on my desktop computer. And he says, and I said, have the same kind of evidence that the New Testament has. The Quran, I misspelled Quran by accident. Quran is 600 years after Jesus, even though it is about Jesus. The earliest thing written on Buddhism, and Siddhartha Gautama, that's the founder of Buddhism, is 500 years removed from his life. Sometimes Apollonius of Tyana is suggested, right? We will talk about Apollonius of Tyana later on. We'll have an interesting back and forth on that. He often did the same kinds of miracles the gospel reported for Jesus. However, the earliest source we have on him, or I put it on his, but it's him, is from a philosopher named Philostratus in the early 3rd century, over 100 years after he had lived. Jonathan said over and over again in that debate, you have to look at the particulars of the case. 1 Corinthians is one of the undisputed epistles of Paul, dated to within 25 years of Jesus' crucifixion. The 1 Corinthians 15 creed is an early creed presented by Paul, what was passed to him, and it dates to within 5 years of Jesus' crucifixion. The point being is that there are reasons why we reject these other religious texts, and it isn't just because they don't agree with orthodoxy or, our theology. Accepting testimony does not mean we must become super gullible all of a sudden. We can trace the proclamation of Jesus' resurrection right to the original eyewitnesses. There is no scholar worth his salt that would think these other religious texts holds a candle to the New Testament. That's what I said. And I still stand by the statement long after me and him had already done debating, which of course I think we only been done by a couple of days, but I will still stand for the statement because it's true. It's true. He came back with Quran was far closer to history. Gospels don't hold a candle to the Quran. And I said, then he said, which original eyewitnesses? Paul is closest. He doesn't talk about physical resurrection. Only Gospels after him talk about it. Now, this is something that me and him will debate about later. Now, I continue to go on, and I talk about the Quran, about it dating 600 years after Jesus. The Gospels are 30 to 60 years of Jesus' lifetime, based upon even skeptical dates of the Gospels. And he says Quran is mostly about Allah, not Jesus, which is, I'll expose the fallaciousness of that argument later. Then he brings up this particular miracle, alleged miracle in the Quran, where Muhammad allegedly split the moon. And he brings this up in the Quran, or brings this up in their post that was in the Quran. And he constantly throws this up. I think this is the only miracle he's even aware of. This is the only one he ever talks about in all of our debate. But he claimed it was tested by eyewitnesses. I come to find out this is absolutely not true. This is absolutely not true. It is not tested by eyewitnesses at all. It was based on stories or verses, as he would try to later say. Verses, which of course, if the story of him doing it, creating this miracle is in the Quran, and the Quran is put together by verses that other people memorized, and that was dictated to Muhammad by the angel Gabriel, allegedly, which nobody was witnesses to, by the way. And the angel Gabriel had administered to Muhammad, Muhammad had witnessed to, or allegedly had told, according to the Hadith, that's what the Hadith says, that he gave this the Quran, which was in written form. It wasn't in or in oral form. It wasn't in written form within his own lifetime. A battle called the Battle of Yama happened after Muhammad had died, and where 70 of the people that memorized this information, most of them, had died at the Battle of Yama. So they raced to try to piece together this stuff, because it was fragmentary. And so they started finding people that memorized bits and pieces of the Quran, and they found a few written things, but it was extremely fragmentary. So they, had to rely mostly on people's memories, and then they put them together to formulate what became known as the composition of the Quran. Now, of course, all this is mute because they began burning manuscripts later because of the differences between the different versions, and so they try to come up with one universal version called the Uthmanic revision. This event is called the Uthmanic revision. This is Uthman's version of the Quran. So, and of course, I found out all that later, because actually I didn't really realize that, because I don't have to deal with a lot of Muslims, so I knew some things about the Quran, but I didn't know as much as I do now, because now I'm actually very educated on the history. I'm very thankful for a work by Dr. James White. Every Christian needs to know about the Quran, even though I don't deal with Muslims at all, because I don't know any Muslims. If I did, I would definitely talk to them and witness them. But James White, I bought James White's book anyhow because I like a lot of his books, and he gave me some apologetic information about the Quran and be able to deal with the kind of arguments and what they argue and their theology and the history of the Quran and things like that. But I never read the entire book until I started to get more into it. Because of the what Anuj kept arguing about the Quran. So he brings up the moon spleen miracle allegedly saying eyewitnesses. He was claiming it was based on eyewitness. I couldn't find out later it was not. But he asked, why are you a Muslim? And then he sends back another post and says, since Quran is right about miracles, so it's from God, and it denies Jesus was not resurrected, except it assumes he's from God. I never said that. And it being right about miracles would not make it mean it's right about everything else, even if it's right about the existence of miracles. I mean, Christians believe in miracles. But how's that an argument in favor of what it claims? What it claims is different than just the fact that miracles happen. Christians believe miracles happen. I mean, we both, Christians and Islam, have a supernatural worldview. So it does not follow. It's actually it's a non sequitur too, because it does not follow, but it's also because it's a slippery slope fallacy. Slippery slope fallacy says if A, then B, then C, then D, without showing a causal connection between them. He never denies making a slippery slope fallacy. I did accuse him of it. He never really denies making a slippery slope fallacy. But he does try to find a causal connection just the same. Ask about what eyewitness is referring to. It's all right. Okay, he cusses a little bit in there. I mean, he doesn't really get volatile as much as some of the other guys do, and he doesn't cuss, with every word he says, but he does cuss a little bit. And I talked about Paul's belief in bodily resurrection because he denies that. Said this isn't true. Paul believes in a bodily resurrection. In fact, in Romans 8:24, he says, not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit grown inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. Paul also said in Romans 8:11, and if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies. These are very explicit references. He never responds to these explicit references. Instead, he quotes a passage in Galatians 1:16, which talks about Jesus being revealed in him. But the word revelation there is apocalyptus. It's not the word for appearance. It's not the word for resurrection. It is the word for, did I say resurrection? I didn't mean resurrection before. It's the word for reveal is what it is. It's not the word for resurrection. It's not the word for appear. It is the word for reveal, unveiling, manifestation. It's that kind of word. It does not mean to appear. It does not. In fact, Paul apparently isn't even focused on how or what Jesus looked like visibly in the passage of Galatians 1:16. There, he was focused more on this experience. It's possible that Paul saw something spiritual into the experience as well. Maybe like a double-sided kind of situation where you've seen physical resurrection, but it had spiritual significance to Paul too. But either way, he never uses the word resurrection there. And the way the ancient world always used resurrection was always a physical resurrection. There are very explicit passages throughout Paul's works. We can also throw in 1 Thessalonians 4, and we can throw in that. We know that Paul was a former Pharisee. I mentioned that as well in Philippians 3:5. And we know what Pharisees in the first century believed. They believed in the bodily resurrection of the world. So we actually know that. Paul would never have said Jesus rose again from the dead if it was not a bodily resurrection. And this comes from actually studying it. I've got N.T. Wright's book, The Resurrection of the Son of God, which I cited quite extensively in the there, talking about that. All right, let's move forward. Okay, I think I mentioned that what was it? I said this. Yeah, right here. Where I said that the Quran says the Injil, which is the gospel in Arabic, should be trusted and so forth. And I said it has a better situation. He says that no, it's also corrupted. Right here, it says the Quran also is corrupted. He quotes a scripture which doesn't even say anything about the Injil being corrupted. And it says on top of that, he starts getting into a lot of side issues, by the way, a lot of side issues. It says on top of that, all gospels are basically copying from one another. It's story that is being copied and pasted. There are no eyewitnesses. Author of Matthew and Luke are believing Christians who are copying from one who ever wrote Mark, and Mark never wrote about any resurrection. He's saying that Mark didn't write anything about resurrection, and just hints at knowledge of tradition of Jesus' resurrection. This is an old argument that a lot of skeptics like to throw up. Basically, the gist of this is that Mark most likely ended in Mark 16:8. And I agree with that because I don't think the last 12 verses of Mark are originally the Gospel of Mark. So some people say, well, Mark doesn't have a resurrection. Well, there's a few major things wrong with this theory. First of all, there is no description of a resurrection appearance in Mark. doesn't mean there's no resurrection in Mark. Mark clearly knows about the resurrection, and he doesn't just simply alludes to it. The angels prophesied of Jesus' resurrection. In fact, the resurrection of Peter, found in the early creedal tradition by Paul, which I'll talk about later, 1 Corinthians 15, and one of that says he appeared to Peter. That's an individual appearance, and everyone agrees on this, right? Gerlume, an atheistic New Testament scholar, says it can be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ, end quote. So yeah, this is the individual appearance of Peter is the one that's being referenced by the angel as well. And the angel also referenced appearance in Galilee, and it just so happens that Galilee is probably the most likely place for the 500 to witness Jesus, because that's actually where the feeding of the 5,000 happened, because it would have a large enough space that could occupy that many people at one given time. And this appearance is mentioned early on by an angel in the Gospel of Mark. All right, so that's the first major problem. The second major problem is that the resurrection proclamation is way earlier than the Gospels. So this becomes a red herring. And I tell him this all through the debate, that this is a red herring. It is a red herring. When it comes to the case of the resurrection, the Gospels being based on eyewitness testimony, they're all red herrings. I know Jonathan brought up the Gospels. Eyewitness testimony, did it to make some points or as far as reliability and so forth. He did what was called the maximum data approach. I'm not going to go into that at this point. The approach I use my own specific type of argument called the historical approach to Jesus' resurrection. It's kind of in between the minimalistic facts approach and the maximum data approach that Jonathan McClattchie used in his debate with Matt Dillahunty. At any given case, when it comes to the case of the resurrection, it's really a red herring. And the reason is because the resurrection was proclaimed long before the Gospels were even written. We can trace the resurrection proclamation back to the original eyewitnesses themselves. And, the belief or view that some people have about the Gospels and about Mark, it really is completely irrelevant. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, there was no resurrection account at all in Mark's Gospel. Guess what? We still have Paul, who's writing 1 Corinthians, and it dates in the mid-50s. Okay? Most conservatives will usually put Mark's Gospel between AD 59 and AD 65. Although there are some conservatives and even a few liberals that would probably put Mark all the way back to the 40s. I don't think it dates that early. Based on what Craig Evans has talked about on that, I don't think it's that early. I think John A.T. Robinson, I think, in his book Redating the New Testament, might date Mark that early. I don't think Mark dates that early. I usually put Mark around AD 59 or AD 60. I think most conservatives usually lean around AD 65. Most liberals usually date Mark's Gospel to AD 70. But either way, whether you're going by most conservatives or most liberals, almost all scholars would say 1 Corinthians predates all four Gospels. Almost all of them would. And so this is why it's a red herring. It's completely irrelevant. How is that relevant to the whether or not if the Gospels whether Mark, the earliest of the four Gospels, recorded the resurrection or not. It wouldn't be, because we have evidence that's far earlier than the four Gospels. Now, he does try to make a claim that the earliest Gospel that we have that talk about physical resurrection was Mark's Gospel, but this is incorrect. Or the earliest account that we have of physical resurrection. This is incorrect, because Paul talks about physical resurrection, and he's very explicit with it, as I mentioned already. What about this thing about the Gospels copying off each other? All right, let's talk about that a little bit, because I'm fixing to go into several things. All right. Okay, I mentioned this later. Actually, I don't think I actually have it early on. So I'll tell you. Basically, the Gospels are not copying off each other. They're not. It's not like a cheat sheet test or something where like Matthew looking over Mark's shoulder and say, "Mark, what do you have for miracle number 2?" Like they're cheating off of a test or something. Matthew and Luke used Mark as a source. There's a kind of literary dependency that was found between the synoptics on a portion of those Gospels. And sometimes people try to argue too much from this and way more than what they actually know. This is usually referred to as Markan priority. There is some scholars that take Matthew in priority, but it's in the extreme minority. My own view is Markan priority. This is the view that Matthew and Luke use Mark as a source. All right. Now, here's the thing. Here's the rub. Okay, Matthew and Luke also use a common source. Scholars typically call this source Q. Yeah, it's supposed to be named after a German letter or a German, based on the German word Quelle. And so they refer, which is the German word for source. So, and they say this is the common source material between Matthew and Luke, but differs from Mark. Generally, when Matthew and Luke agrees with Mark, they say Mark is used as a source. When Matthew and Luke agrees with each other, but differ from Mark, they say that they're using Q. Now, scholars differ on what Q was. We don't really know. It's just speculation. I mean, it is pure speculation. There's no getting around that. And I mentioned that to him too. It is speculation when you argue what Q is. I lean toward, I got a few reasons. It's not totally speculative, but I got a few reasons for thinking this. But I lean toward the idea that Luke got his information from Matthew, and Matthew was his own source. And as a result, Luke is getting his information from Matthew himself. Now, that's my view. Most scholars usually think that Matthew and Luke is getting their information apart from each other in another source called Q. All right. Now, understand there's also information unique to Matthew and there's information unique to Luke. Generally, scholars usually refer to this as M for the information unique to Matthew and L for the information unique to Luke. Now, of course, John is 90% original to the Gospel of John. It's not 90% of the Gospel is not found anywhere in the Synoptics. So it is considered by virtually everyone that the Gospel of John is wholly independent of the Synoptic Gospels. So it's its own gospel. Either John is using another source. Some people think it's a lesser disciple. I personally think that John is his own source because I think John, son of Zebedee, or John the Apostle, wrote the Gospel of John. And so you got that. And of course, that's independent from the Synoptics. So between the four Gospels, you've got Mark, you got Q, you got M, you got L, and you got John. assuming Q is not Matthew, or Q is not Luke using Matthew, then you would have 5 sources. If you assume Q used Matthew, then you'd have 4. But you have independent sources, wouldn't you? Yeah. So interesting enough, it doesn't prove it. Trying to use that, and sometimes people argue in the speculation, like, Q using Q or something of that nature, but it doesn't work very well as an argument. He tries to do that, but they're not just copying all of them. There's actually independent sources within the tradition. Okay, now I did a series of points, and this is where Anuj is going to do each one of our points in a separate post. This is what starts multiplying the post upon me. And remember, I'm trying to do all this from work, so it's overloading me. Then I quoted him. He says, since Quran is right about miracles, so it's from God, and it denies Jesus' resurrection. Jesus was not resurrected, you said. No. This is me. I said, no, let me give this one in several points below. 1, there are always common ground between individuals, except Matt Dillahunty, who likes rejecting everything, but that does not mean you have to accept everything. This commits a slippery slope fallacy. This is the first time I identified the fallacy. I will cue some of this more than any other fallacy possible, because this is the one he commits the most. I said this commits the slippery slope fallacy. It would be like saying Barman thinks Paul did not write the book of Hebrews, and neither does Brian Bowen, me. And I put in brackets, and I don't. Therefore, Brian must accept everything else Bar Ehrman believes, or vice versa. Bar Ehrman agrees that the crucifixion is historically true, in brackets I say, and he does. That must mean that Bar Ehrman concedes to everything else that Brian Bowen and Christians believe. You see the fallacy? And I put number 2, I said, just because the Quran is right about the existence of miracles, I already answered this. I already mentioned that as well, why that's already fallacious. It's like Christians never claim that the fact that the Bible has miracles in it makes it true. Although I applaud Islam for their monotheism and supernatural worldview, at the end of the day, the Quran makes a number of historical errors, including denying Jesus' crucifixion. 4, finally, how can you hold Islam to a high standard when they are 6 centuries removed, and we got a testimony that goes back to within a few years of the event? Just something to think about. He comes back, he says, on my first point, he says, no, it doesn't. Quran revealed Muhammad in 22 years if you accept moon-splitting miracles, which you have stand in the resurrection. He may be denying the slippery slope fallacy here, but I don't know if he is or not. He doesn't specifically identify the slippery slope fallacy. I think he's saying it's not in comparison to it, which it is. He is, if you accept miracles, which you have to given your stand on resurrection. So because I believe Jesus rose again from the dead, I must accept other miracle claims. Hence the slippery slope fallacy. You have to accept whole Quran. You hear that? See that right there? Whole Quran is of divine origin. I gotta accept the whole Quran. If I accept Josephus' count about the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, then I also must accept the fables written in Aesop's fables. Does that make any sense to anybody? That's a fallacious reasoning right there. Okay, let's move forward. 2, he says it does because miracles prove that Quran was the word of God. No, it doesn't. No Christian claims that the Bible is proven true because of miracles. We would have to accept almost all miracles from everything, including ancient biographies. That would make us inconsistent. This is the reason why we don't accept that, because we don't think the Bible's true just because it presents miracles. Because, you know, you got works by like Apollonius of Tyana that presents miracles. You've got most ancient biographies presenting miracles. You got miracle counts being found in other works and religious texts and things like that. Nobody thinks that it's true simply because it has miracles in it. And he says, because miracles prove the word of God, and God and the word of God cannot be wrong, can it? Except it doesn't prove that it's word of God. He says Jesus is mentioned about 100 of 6,500 verses of Quran. He's trying to say that means that Jesus must be an insignificant figure. I'll come back on that one. 3, no Christians claim that biblical miracle of resurrection is true, therefore Christianity is true. They don't say the Bible is true because it is self-evident that Bible isn't true. The resurrection account itself is just a ghost story. I will pounce on that in a minute with multiple inconsistencies in the story itself, different gospels. Of course, the gospels don't have multiple inconsistencies. In fact, they don't have any inconsistencies. They have differences. To assume that these differences are errors or contradictions is actually circular reasoning. Because it's you have to demonstrate that that's the case. You can't just simply assume it. And they assume it. They have to assume that they cannot be reconciled and so forth. 4, because it's the word of God, literally all of it. What evidence has he got that it is? Oh, it's got miracles in it, so that makes it the word of God. That's his argument, actually. And it's false. All right. And I said, we know the Uthmanic revision happened, and it was well after the Quran. Well, actually, I was kind of wrong about that one. It's actually 18 years later. But, and, okay, that's a mistake I made in the dating, and I apologized a bit later when I got home to my sources, and I could check these things out myself. And I mentioned that it says nothing in the NGO being corrupted. Using apology. Okay, he's hounding on my use of James White's book, but I'll get back to that later. He says, okay, laugh out loud. Earliest biblical manuscript is from 2nd century AD. I don't know if he understood 1st and 2nd century because he says this is at least 100 years. 100 years after the text was supposed to have been written, while earliest Quranic manuscripts from 650 AD itself, no matter how much you want to, the Gospels don't hold a candle to the Quran. And by your own weird and weak epistemology, which my epistemology is not weird or weak, you should be a Muslim, my friend. No, because the Quran tells the standard of the time. But listen to this, 2nd century AD, at least 100 years after. Now, one of my fortes as a Christian apologist is textual criticism. So one of the funnest things I like doing is talking about manuscripts because I delve very specifically in that particular subject matter. And he said, oh, 2nd century, it's 100 years later. I wonder if he understands that 2nd century doesn't actually mean like AD 200, because that's actually 3rd century. Like right now it is in the 2000s, 2020, but it's considered the 21st century. It's considered the 21st century. The 20th century was the 1900s. The 19th century was the 1800s, and so forth. And that's the way that's the way it starts off, always. Because of going back and, the very first time the world ever existed and so forth. That's how the dating system was set up. 2nd century does not mean 100 years later. In fact, the earliest papyri manuscript that we have of the New Testament is the John Ryan's papyrus, or P52, It's a little credit card size, but it is dated extremely early. If you assume the liberal dating of John, I don't. I think it's earlier. John's gospel written earlier. But if you assume what most scholars think about John's gospel dating, that's about around the mid 90s, 80, 95. And most scholars would hold, including Bart Ehrman, that P52 should be dated to AD 125. I mentioned this in there, and I talked about the evidence and so forth for that. And I said I hold the position that it's earlier than AD 125. I think it's closer to AD 100. I think Philip Comfort's in his book Encountering the Manuscripts. This one right here, Encountering the Manuscripts. I think he said AD 110. But I think it's closer to AD 100. I don't think there's enough evidence as of yet to put the P52 in the 90s. I know some people do, and I'm open to the 90s, very open to it. I think Philip Comfort said in his book Encountering the Manuscripts that he was open to it as well, but it lacked evidence. And I agree with him. It lacked evidence on it. So I think the position close to 8100. I think Dan Wallace takes a similar position to it. But almost all of them, myself included, would take a position before AD 125. By AD 125 or before. I don't know any textual scholar that would cite or think that this should be dated to 8150 or after. I don't know anyone that does. He tries to cite a scholar, I guess someone whose PhD was in biblical studies, but he wasn't a textual scholar or a paleographer for that matter. He had no credentials as a paleographer. There's no paleography degree, and there was no textual criticism degree. Of course, textual criticism and paleography overlap, but he lacks this. He lacks this degree. And so the kind of sources he was citing was very questionable indeed. He mostly relied on the internet, clearly. By the way, if Anuj is watching this, again, understand, and I told him this toward the end of the debate as well, that my issue is not with him personally. It's not a personal attack. I know sometimes we feel like it's a personal attack when someone attacks our views, but it's an attack on his arguments, not him. And we can respond to arguments. All right, but P52, if we take what at least most scholars would take on P52, which is 125, this puts it within like 25 to 30 years. I think 25 years of 30 years. 30 years of John writing his gospel. If we assume the liberal date, that's the latest you can date John, okay, by mid-90s, okay? This is what most liberals will take. And you assume what most scholars, liberals and conservatives, all take the position of 8125. You're looking about within 30 years. 30 years of John's gospel. Okay, assuming the dating of that liberals have are correct. All right. Okay. Says, you laugh out loud. You think we have the original manuscripts of the Bible? And I said we did. He says, man, you don't know crap about textual history. Yes, I do. He says, you know what? This is what got me. I actually started reading this after our debate was over with. And this kind of was like, what is the world? He's like, just Google earliest manuscripts of Bible and come back. I don't have to Google the earliest manuscripts of the Bible. I've seen them. I've seen, or photographs of them. But I've seen them. I've seen them, researched them, studied them, found out their textual histories. I've had courses in textual criticism. What can you say to that? Well, I'll give the guy a benefit of the doubt. He didn't know I had knowledge in textual criticism. He just assumed that I was some guy speaking, off my rear end or something. But the reality is I actually had knowledge and expertise in this area. as a Christian apologist. It's one of the fortes I have as a Christian apologist. And I delve very specifically into manuscripts. Okay. He says, okay, cool. I said, no, you committing some fallacy. I told him again. I fell off the slippery slope fallacy a little bit more. I'm going to read this one. This is one of the mistakes that Matt Dillahunty makes when he claims acceptance of the resurrection will lead one to accept everything from Elvis sightings to what a witch did in the woods one night. Not true. Slippery slope fallacy looks like this: if A, then B, then C, then D, without establishing a causal connection between them. A person may have good reasons for accepting A, but no good reasons, or maybe even good reasons against the acceptance of B. Islam claimed that Muhammad received revelations in a cave in which he was alone, and claimed he originally thought it was a jinn. I think that might be coming from his earliest biography. But there's a possibility he might have thought it was a jinn, which is basically evil spirit. It might be coming from these. I remember reading it recently when I was doing this debate with him, which is the Arabic word for demon. That's what evil spirit is a demon. However, I thought we were talking about the Quran, the religious text. This is what I was responding to. Again, the earliest version is the Uthmanic revision, which is true, which most certainly does not date to the time of Muhammad, which is also true because it actually dates after Muhammad. And I go into it and I talk about his earliest biographies, 150 years. I'm not exactly sure what question I'll answer there. But I do say that no Christian claims that the Bible, that the miracles, now you're done with that, the miracles, just because there's miracles in it, makes it the word of God. He says incorrect yet again. Miracles of moon splitting is from the Quran itself. Yeah, I never said it wasn't from the Quran. I said most miracles. Actually, I think I said most miracles are from his earliest biography. That was incorrect. Most miracles are from the Hadith. A lot of them are in the earliest biography, which is 150 years later. But only the Quran only has some miracles in it. But I never denied that it didn't have any miracles in it, or that the moon splitting wasn't in the Quran. And it does come in the Quran. It's in the Quran. Says, wait, what? So other religions doing miracles not enough to warrant belief in their religion is true? What makes Christianity true? And we go into that and answer it over and over again. I have to repeat myself. Okay, here's one. It says, no, it doesn't. Let me tell about a historical fact you may not know. And I talk about the Gospels being ancient biographies, and that most Gospels or most biographies have miracle claims in them. He talks about, he says, just some believing Christians writing about their beliefs. If they are accurate eyewitnesses, that there would have been much more than so much inconsistency, which isn't true at all. We actually, whenever a historian sees works that are independent of each other, and they're talking about the same event, historians expect differences between them. This idea that somehow there will be no differences at all if they were eyewitnesses. Well, that's only true if they got together and made it up. The fact that there's differences indicate to us that they did not just invent a story. They didn't just invent the story of Jesus or invent the story of the resurrection or something of that nature. So the differences actually help us know that we are dealing with independent accounts, and that at least the writers of the Gospels were not trying to fabricate a story. That's all about Sigmund Jackson number 3. Yes, all scholars exclude miracles from the biographies. Only Christians, because of religious bias, would like this specific miracle in the Bible to be true. No, it's because of the evidence. He keeps making slippery slope fallacy. Knowledge greater than all practice and practice, but all prophets are the same. That's in Muhammad or in Islam. Muhammad is considered one of the greatest of prophets. They might consider some like the Old Testament prophets and stuff like that pretty much the same, but they do consider Muhammad one of the greatest of prophets, and Jesus they definitely think is the greatest prophet. Okay, and okay, we got onto the side issue here. Can I talk about the historical reliability of the Quran and the science and the fact that it contains scientific inaccuracies? And he says, Bible has Earth being a circle. Tell me which archaeology confirms that, which that's not archaeology at all, it's science. Bible got the order of evolution of universe and life on Earth wrong, which is not the case because those were just theories that are believed. It's not what I am talking about. I'm talking about verifiable facts. He put Jesus' resurrection event in first recorded in the Gospels. No, it's not. Closest is Paul's Gospel, which Paul never wrote a Gospel, he wrote an epistle. He continues claiming that the Quran is based on direct eyewitnesses, which isn't true. I put, nope, you're wrong. We have fragments dated within less than a generation of the writer's lifetime, like P52, King versus 18th chapter. I talked about all that. There was also some other manuscripts I mentioned that are extremely early. He says 90 AD means 60 years after the event. These are comment on the earliest date of 52, which it wouldn't be 90 years from John's lifetime. The Gospel of John itself was obviously written early, but it wouldn't be, the manuscript itself would not be 90 years later. It'd be, if it was in the 90s, assuming that John's Gospel was probably written earlier than the 90s, which of course I think it's written earlier. In any given case, he makes a lot of factual inaccuracies, and he has a lot of misrepresentations in here. He says recent religious event would obviously have more record, which is not true. Not based on how historians are looking at it. Obviously, the fact that it's closer to us is irrelevant. It's how close it is to the event itself. So if the Quran is 600 years after Jesus' as primary figure, it can't be considered historically reliable. The Gospels are 30 to 60 years of Jesus' lifetime. All right. Okay. That said, okay, I talked about misrepresenting the market priority. Basically, it's all stuff that I had already mentioned to you. Let's see. I talked about James White's book there. I said I know quite a bit about textual history. Let's see. I think he accused me of the historical credibility of the Quran. I said the fact that I said never said that. I said the opposite. See, I put one place. I put how does alleged inconsistency prove there was no reliable eyewitnesses to Jesus' resurrection? I'm going to use a number of points, but please don't answer this post splitting up your answer several points. That's what you did last time. I said, one, as already stated, the resurrection proclamation was far earlier than the Gospels. Even I would grant these alleged inconsistencies, and I don't. Even if I were to grant these alleged inconsistencies, and I don't, these are being presented in the four Gospels decades later, not within the original resurrection proclamation. At best, even if substantiated, it would just bring into question the Gospels as eyewitness testimony, which is not being argued from in my case on the resurrection. Said this too. I said this is also the reason that in the case of the resurrection, gospel differences are red herring. Show me difference in the original proclamation of the resurrection. 3, differences in independent accounts does not mean that historians cannot trust the sources. And I talked about this as well already. And I gave some examples on the fire of Rome. That's why I usually give as an example. The 3 sources for the fire of Rome in AD 64, Tacitus, Suetonius, and Dio Cassius. All 3 of these guys are considered reliable historians, but they differ wildly on the peripheral details. But nobody tries to throw the baby out with the bathwater and assume that Rome didn't burn in the ground in AD 64. That would be silly. That's what they all agree on. Said the vast difference of these differences can be reconciled. Finally, the differences of secondary detail, they're in the peripherals. Also, I have already shown you explicit references by Paul that he believed in a bodily resurrection. Galatians 1:12 is a difficult passage to translate. At that time, I thought it was Galatians 1:12. Later, he corrected me, and he was claiming on Galatians 1:16. They're similar. They both are in the same context, basically, and they both use the same Greek word there. Okay, going further, and I mentioned, I alluded to it and mentioned that 1 Thessalonians 4 also could be said towards the body and resurrection of Christ, as far as what Paul conceded to. We believe the resurrection on the basis of evidence. I talked about that. Okay, we went through a lot of these things. I had to deal with a lot of side issues. A circle with the shape of the earth, I said, is an apt description from space. Our earth is spherical, which is nothing more than a 3D circle, kind of like a pyramid is a 3D triangle. So the Bible is not Bible got it right. This was revolutionary in either Isaiah's time or Job's, since much of the ancient world thought the world was a flat disk. But the writers identified it as a circle was a unique concept, and it's science that confirms the shape of the earth, not archaeology. There is no archaeological discovery ever made that contradicts the Bible. Go ahead and give me some examples. I have entire books written on the subject of archaeology, by archaeologists even, that I have access to. I dare you. That was a challenge by me. I was actually challenging him to produce a single archaeological evidence that contradicts a statement made by the Bible. He never once does it. Not once. I don't know if he just didn't want to bother with the challenge or if he knew he couldn't meet it. Either way, he never does it. Whenever I talk, and I clarify this a little bit more, my position on scientific accuracies in the Bible, whenever I talk of scientific facts, I mean verifiable scientific facts, like the shape of the earth, not questionable theories among scientists like evolution or the Big Bang. I'm not talking about stuff that can be disputed. I'm talking about stuff that's known, verifiable, falsifiable, etc. And the things might be widely believed among scientists, but they're not provable, verifiable facts, which is what I'm talking about when I talk about scientific accuracy. They're at their very core theories. We get into a long conversation about theories too. By the way, it is evolution and the Big Bang that got it wrong. I am not going to set in a big conversation with you on this. Although I disagree with their interpretation, this ultimately not what makes one a Christian. Although me and Jonathan is in disagreement over things like Genesis 1, the Big Bang, the theory of evolution, and the age of the earth, we're both Christians and we both agree with the resurrection, which is true. We actually agree on that. In fact, I agree with much of the arguments that Jonathan McClattchie brought to the table in his case of the resurrection. In fact, during the debate, I could find very little I disagree with him on. Okay, I mentioned didn't write a gospel, he wrote an epistle. I quoted N.T. Wright here. So N.T. Wright, a British historian and scholar, wrote a massive tome on what the word resurrection meant in the ancient world. As I said before, most Jews believed that the event would happen at the end of the world, and the pagans denied it, but they all understood the word resurrection to mean the same thing, a physical event. He said on pages 31, 33, and 201, thus, when the ancients spoke of resurrection, whether denying it or affirming it, they were telling a two-step story. Resurrection involves a definite content, some sort of re-embodiment, and a definite narrative shape. This meaning is constant throughout the ancient world. When the ancient classical world spoke of and denied resurrection, there should be no controversy about what the word and its cognates to be referring to. It was a coming back again into something like the sort of life that humans presently experience. Resurrection was not one way of describing what death consists of. It was a way of describing something everyone knew did not happen. The idea that death could be reversed, undone, could, as it were, work backwards. Resurrection was, more specifically, not the redefinition of or description of death, a way of giving a positive interpretation to the fact that the breath and blood of a human body had to cease to function, leading quickly to corruption and decay, but the reversal or undoing or defeat of death, restoring to some kind of bodily life. And of course, I dealt with some of this evidence about, the resurrection proclamation pre-Mark and well before Mark. And I said it was not written down by direct eyewitnesses. I talked about that. He said the extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And I put, this is subjective. What constitutes extraordinary, and who sets the standard? By the way, historically, we have such evidence since we have an early period that dates back to within a few years of the events. Now it says when you have historical sources that date hundreds of years after the fact, finding early material that goes back to within a few years of the event is absolutely extraordinary. Talked about that already. Okay, I talked about that already. He says it means, okay, on 3D circle, he says it means a flat disk. Anyway, so resurrection of Jesus is not basis for your faith in Christianity. Okay, I never said that. Do you trust Jesus was telling the truth? Okay, again, not relevant, but he brings that up. Some early replies were just short questions because your position seemed entirely clear to me. This is from Anuj. He says, I assume your position is miracles prove existence of supernatural, resurrection of Jesus proves supernatural. Of course, I constantly told him that's not true. As far as resurrection goes, I think you can come up with certain inferences. One of those inferences is the supernatural. I don't introduce resurrection as proof that supernatural is true. Usually, I do think there's evidence. If you prove that Jesus rose again from the dead, I think you can draw a reasonable inference that supernatural is true. But that's not what I was arguing. Because I have to prove that resurrection is true first place. And so I do that through evidence. But I don't think miracles prove the supernatural. Or I wasn't trying to prove them supernatural through the use of miracles. At least in my arguments with that. It says Jesus is performing a miracle, thus whatever other claims he was making is true. Again, that's so fallacy. See, these first two, I don't think I have really much of a problem with, but it's this third one that becomes wrong because it automatically goes into that slippery slope where if I accept miracle claims, I must accept everything the person says. If I even accept that miracles are even possible, and if it's believed that he did miracles, I must accept everything he says. When I'm not accepting everything Jesus said on the basis of miracles, that's not the reason why I'm accepting everything he says, but that's what he's assuming. He says, tell me if you if I misrepresent position in any way and not apply the rest of your post. Yes, he does misrepresent position, especially with this third part. This third part is the main one that actually misrepresents position. It's like he just kind of does a logical leap from here to arguing something completely different. Anything else? He says, this is exactly where you're wrong. It's probably about Allah. That's the Arabic word for God, telling Muhammad what mankind should do. Jesus is mentioned so many times simply because he was a prophet, and his story is most famous among believers of Abrahamic traditions, which is not exactly true because that's Jewish tradition, not Christian. He says I did not mean literally also copying. Okay, he says the Hebrew word for circle. I told him the Hebrew circle is kahug, which means vault, which is an archway. Well, I was kind of wrong about the archway thing. I had to dig a little deeper up behind the word vault to discover what it actually meant. It's actually like the vault of the heavens, the outer surroundings of the earth. It's basically a circular shape is what it is. And like I said, the earth looks like a circle from space. So it is that description. Okay, there are scholars that dispute the issue of whether the gospel reported on the sayings were true or not. But even if they were right on those denying that Jesus had said, this would not make the resurrection proclamation false. Okay, let's move forward. Says, okay, we got onto the ancient biographies here, I think. Okay, we got on the ancient biographies, and well, he says that he thinks that myth can't be distinguished myth. And I talked about the men and living memory, and he misrepresents everything I said constantly. And I'm being very explicit as possible. I don't understand if there's a language barrier or what's going on. He never. I asked him if it was language barrier several times, but he never did respond to that point. He never did reference it or not. Okay, the early account of the resurrection predates the Gospels. Okay, I'm trying to kind of skim through these, reading only some parts of it here and there. I've studied the Gospels, found them to be historically trustworthy. Let's go move forward. Again, he makes misrepresentation of my argument, keeps on making. He brings up the alleged zombie apocalypse in Matthew's Gospel, which is actually begging the question epithet, because they're assuming something about the text. It's like if a news reporter is reporting on a crime, and they'll say that the murderer has finally been apprehended. What they should say is the murder suspect has been finally apprehended. By calling the suspect murderer, she automatically assumed that he did it, and which was not the case. In either case, it also, along with committing the back question after the fallacy, is definitionally wrong, since a zombie is a slow-moving, mindless, soulless creature of the undead, which would have been completely foreign to the context that Matthew intended. Um, I'm gonna continue this in part two. I'm gonna break this up into multiple parts. Thank you for watching. Please watch part two of my evaluation, my debate with the Indian Anuj Agarwal on YouTube. Thank you.